Good to see y'all again. This is the last time you're going to have to hear from me. And as I see all of your faces, I know that's something you're looking forward to. And that's okay. I know that you all want to get back to your lives. And I can tell you on behalf of Mr. Johnson that your attention during this trial is greatly appreciated. What you've had to set aside in order to provide this service, I have no doubt that the court and Mr. Hagerman, Ms. Iris, all of us agree that you're indebted to you for that. Because like I said in opening, this is important. And you're about to have to roll up your sleeves and go to work. And it's going to be a difficult job. This young man's fate is in your hands. The concept of justice, right? We talked about that in Fort Dyer. We talked about that again in opening, right? And it's in your hands. Meting out justice. And it's difficult because what you've heard is the tragedy of someone losing their life, of their family members not having that person in their life. And that is terrible, and the court will tell you, as terrible as that is, you can't consider that when you're determining guilt or innocence in this case. But it's heavy. And on the other hand, you have Mr. Johnson. This young man that you heard in the evidence is a young man, aspiring rapper. Wanted to make it as a rap artist. When you're going back through these exhibits, you're going to see a picture of him in front of the house on Bradley. You know, engaged in a music video, right, for his rap. Hat kicked to the side, kind of grin on his face, because that's what he wanted to do. And his fate is directly in your hands. And like we talked about, it's never justice to wrongfully convict someone. And so that determination that you're going to make, beyond a reasonable doubt, is the heaviest one, maybe one of the heaviest decisions you'll ever make. And you've had an opportunity to sit through the trial and hear the evidence, observe the witnesses, and you've been told, keep an open mind. And I hope you have. And I'm sure you have. And not to talk about the case. You know, the thing that you've been listening to for days, with people all around you that have going through the same thing, and then you have to be around them even when you're not here, and you can't talk about the elephant in the room. But today that changes. And not only are you allowed to talk about it, the judge has instructed you that you have to talk about it. And to engage in deliberations meaningfully. To listen to one another, to review the evidence that you've heard, to talk about it, and render a decision. But to the degree you're working together, what you never have to do is abandon your conscience. Now, I don't mean conscience like Cornelius Smith, that conscience, right? Because I don't think he really meant that when you heard from him. He said, oh, the reason I decided to tell the truth is I got a conscience. And we all know that's not the type of thing you're dealing with. You take that more seriously. You mean it. He didn't. You've heard a lot of concepts, you know, the terms of art and the law, the burden of proof, presumption of innocence. And when we started this, I told you, Mr. Johnson sits before you innocent. And I'm again telling you today, after the state has closed its proof, he remains that way. He didn't kill Adolph Horton Jr. He didn't conspire to kill Adolph Horton Jr. And he wasn't the man holding the pistol in the Makita video. And it's going to be up to you to decide that. To watch those videos. Watch them closely. They want to talk about those videos, and I'm encouraging you to study them. Give them a close look. The state doesn't want to acknowledge what I told you in opening, and that is similar, it doesn't mean the same. Plenty of people have gray sweatpants, black shoes with white soles, black hoodies. And as we learned through the proof, in Memphis especially, and elsewhere, Bass Pro has. You can look at it, if we had a window, you could look at it and you could see the Bass Pro, which is the pyramid here. You also heard testimony about it being a fad at that point in time. Famous rappers wearing it. Other famous artists. I think I mentioned Gwen Stefani wearing Bass Pro. One rapper has a signature Bass Pro hat. You heard from one of the detectives that they even interviewed someone who gave them a potential suspect that wasn't Mr. Johnson and said that person always wore a Bass Pro hat. You have to consider that. And then you have Sergeant Dabney, who, for the first time, and I think he acknowledged this, sitting on the stand, says, I think those underwear are the same. They're both blue. You look at the underwear from Tulane Apartments, you look back at the Makita video, those are the same underwear. Look at it. Look at the steel shots. And for yourself, determine, can you tell if those are the same? And as jurors, you get to make that call. You get to look at it for yourself and compare those. We've heard a lot about it's not 1981 anymore. And I agree. Right? You know, we've got cameras, but like I told you in opening, what also has advanced tremendously since 1981 is the world of forensics. Right? Fingerprints, DNA, touch DNA. And you have to ask yourself, why is Justin Johnson's DNA nowhere in that car? There's DNA in that car. You heard a lot about they wiped it. Cornelius Smith said he wiped it. And we'll get to whether you believe that or not in a minute. Okay? But he says he wiped it. But he didn't. There's fingerprints on it. Kristen Garner's, Trayon Ingram's, and Cornelius Smith. There was DNA found. One of it coming back to Trayon Ingram, right? Not Justin Johnson. Now, there's a lot of talk about gloves, right? They made a big point to say, you see gloves in the video. Now, they want you to believe that Mr. Johnson's running around in his Mercedes, and the reason that his prints aren't on it are because he's wearing gloves. And mind you, Cornelius Smith, when he said he wiped the car, never said he wiped the driver's side of the car. Okay? If you believe that. And they want you to believe Mr. Johnson's driving around this white Mercedes, including with his daughter. Look at those videos. You think he's not wearing gloves? And he's got a little girl in tow that would presumably be in that car with him. No DNA recovered. None. Now, during proof, it was interesting because they would show the Mercedes go into crosstown and the Mercedes leave crosstown, and they would show a video of Mr. Johnson getting out and walking in the building or walking out of the building. There is no video that shows Mr. Johnson in that Mercedes. And you heard they had a reel, right? The video was a reel when they're doing crosstown, and when I asked it, I think it was Detective or Sergeant Dabney about there was surely other cars going in and out at this very time. And he said, yeah. But you have to ask yourself, was Justin Johnson ever in that Mercedes? So let's go to Kristen Garner. Kristen Garner gets up here and tries to tell you that. He tries to say he didn't know the car was stolen, Trayon was driving around in the car. And at first, he acts like, even under questioning from Mr. Hagerman, that he wasn't even present when the car was exchanged, because he tries to say, well, Trayon told me. And if you recall, Mr. Hagerman had to kind of go back at him, and I think he said something like, I can't tell you that, and then he eventually started answering some questions. You also remember that this is the same guy that went into law enforcement and said, I've never been in that car. I don't know a guy named Justin Johnson other than on Instagram. He's a rapper. And then suddenly, he starts evolving through the story. Still lying, mind you, to law enforcement. He even looks at a video of himself, right, pumping gas, and goes, that's not me in the video. And he's like, okay, it's me. But they're trying to tell you Justin Johnson's at the Valero gas station, right, when he's pumping gas. Where is he? Now, they want you to believe that this shadowy figure up in the right, top corner was Justin Johnson, and that he was the other passenger in the Infinity, but you can't really make out who he is. You have to rely on Kristen Garner. That's what you have to rely on. And we talked a little bit about, proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And I said one of the ways that you could use to kind of understand it is proof so convincing that you would not hesitate to rely upon it in making the most important decisions of your life. And it's really simple, right? You look there and you go, would I trust Kristen Gardner with anything? If he told me something, would I believe it? The answer is no. Because the more he talked, right, the more you realize he and Trayon are in the Mercedes. They're driving around with a Draco rifle, assault rifle. The same one described as being held by Cornelius Smith in the shooting of Adolph Thornton Jr. Their prints are in the car. He says they have, what he said, a ton of guns in that car. And then he starts talking about how he's related to Dolph, and they were trying to dump the car before, right? And he's reaching out to Dolph's people to try to get rid of a car, which is the reason why after this happened, immediately, day after, he's calling Trayon going, my name's in this. My name's in this. Why would his name be? And B, why couldn't he just say, I don't have anything to do with this? And at Valero, you do see Traiani and Kristen. They're there front and center. Now, there's been a lot of talk about the phone and location. And in the state's argument just now, you heard her saying what the expert said, with a phone using, a tower that could be and he said could be, he said was in the service area of the Valero gas station, or then he said, I didn't do any drive tests, so I can't say what the coverage area would have been, right? And when you're looking at his slides, you've got that really thick PowerPoint exhibit, you'll be able to look at it. And you notice, right, that you're going to notice that the pictures are all really small, they're really zoomed in on the map. And he's talking about, like, this, do you think this is thorough? This is thorough. I mean, he's going through all these calls. Look at what he's doing. I mean, but then you have to ask yourself, well, what happens if you expand the map? And then you realize, and this is the exhibit I entered, you realize he's not even counting all the data and calls, because when you show what he left out at 12:23, right, at the time immediately after Adolph Thornton Jr. was shot, there are several towers that Mr. Johnson's phone gets off of that are, one's 3 miles away in one direction, the other one is 3.2 miles away down by the Memphis airport. And then he has to go, I left those out. Not a really good explanation for why, right? Important when there are a group of fine people that are looking to find the truth and have to make this decision and need to evaluate the accuracy of what he's telling you. And then you realize that when you talk about coverage areas and where things are in relation to these phones, somebody could be anywhere in a 3 mile radius, either any direction. And then you have to go, what is it? What does it show us? How did that help? How does that make you any more certain of someone's presumed location at a given point in time? Because he said it's not an exact science, and I'm not here to tell you that I can pinpoint where he is. And I didn't do drive testing, and I don't know. The next available tower is what a cell phone normally would look for, but also I can't even tell you if the towers were down at the time. That could make a difference. That could put you further out. I couldn't tell you if they were down for maintenance, if they were overburdened, and he said, look, if the tower's real busy, it'll direct you to the next tower. But what it doesn't establish is that Justin Johnson was involved in the conspiracy to kill Adolph Thornton. It doesn't establish that he killed Adolph Thornton or possessed a firearm. Now, a little bit about conspiracy and some more of the facts as you heard them from some of the other witnesses. Now, I have to take a little bit of an issue with the state on something that was said during their initial argument. And that is this. There was no evidence at all that Justin Johnson was present for any meetings discussing this hit. What Cornelius Smith said was he met with Hernandez-Govan and Jook, and Justin Johnson was not there. And then he said he met with Hernandez-Govan and others on another occasion to discuss it, and Justin Johnson was not there. So to suggest that he was present and agreed, where's the agreement? He wasn't there. Now, you get to Mr. Smith. The court has already instructed you about accomplice testimony and is already warning you that when you're considering that, you have to use caution. Now, you also have to apply the credibility factors that are in the jury instructions, but they're not an exhaustive list, right? Like we talked about in voir dire. Some of you, most of you, probably all of you have had to talk to somebody before and go, are they telling me the truth or not? And that's exactly what's here. But accomplice testimony is flagged because that person may have an interest in the outcome of this case. And you go, what is that interest? Well, Cornelius Smith, number one, told, he had to admit, he didn't want to admit it, but he's meeting with the state. He's hoping to get a benefit on his own sentence. He's supposed to be telling the truth. But he's writing his sisters at the exact same time that he's meeting with the government, or the state rather, and telling them, I didn't do this, I'm just lying to get the deal. I'm just lying to get the deal. Now, is that his conscience, like he wanted to say? No. That's him telling his family. Why would he lie to his sisters? If he had a conscience, right? If he had done this out of the sense of, I did this awful thing, I feel awful, I've got to accept responsibility and tell the truth. No. But you remember, and it was kind of an interesting moment when he was testifying, because at one point he says, oh, that's not lying, I was gaming. Gaming's not lying. And the unfortunate part of all this is he's gaming everybody, including trying to game y'all. That's the problem. And he thinks he's going to walk. I mean, and the only person in this case who got paid for this. Remember, there is no proof whatsoever that Justin Johnson got a penny. Cornelius Smith got 50 grand for a lawyer for killing Adolph Thornton and didn't have to give it back. He didn't have to give it back. His lawyer was in the courtroom. And I asked him, I said, you remember, I said, how could you? You didn't give it back, you grew a conscience. What's going on with you? And he went, well, I did it. Service is rendered, right? And the lawyer, he's talking about with his sisters, he's saying, oh, well, my lawyer's telling me to cooperate. I'm walking. I'm not doing it unless I can walk. Now, he was asked by Mr. Hagerman, have I ever told you you're not going to have to go to prison? And he said, no, you haven't. But you have to keep in mind two things, right? At the time he was giving all this information that made him valuable to come in here and talk, he thought he was getting out. That's when those letters are going out. Those letters are going out, And he thinks he's getting out because he's got the lawyer, they got the cooperator from Ali Bobo to walk. And that's the type of thing you have to remember when you're assessing whether you can rely upon Cornelius Smith and anything that he said. The guy that sat in that chair, and he was asked by Mr. Hagerman, when you killed Adolph Thornton, what did you feel? And like it was nothing, said, I didn't feel anything. Let's try to get paid. And that's the guy that they want to put in front of you and say, believe it. You know, he went and talked about exchanging money, right? Getting $800, right? At one point said, do you find people that he got that Mr. Johnson somehow came back into town and he talked on the phone with him and brought $500, and then some other time some other guy in a Chrysler 300 showed up and provided money to his girlfriend. Well, two things. One, that's not what Mr. Smith originally said to law enforcement. He said that Chrysler 300 came twice, and then Mr. Justin Johnson wasn't anywhere in sight. Well, and what do you know about the Chrysler 300? Jamarcus Johnson, right? Did Jamarcus Johnson say when he was here in front of you, did you ever hear the state ask him, did you deliver the money? Is part of you being involved in helping Mr. Johnson? Did you deliver money for him? I mean, he asked about the email, or the text rather, about Cornelius emailing Justin's phone and saying, essentially, I need money for the birthday party. That's because Cornelius Smith is lying from start to finish. And then for the first time ever, here in court, he says he wiped the card out. Who's in contact? Who's in contact with Govan? According to Mr. Smith. Mr. Smith. Who's not in contact with Govan? Mr. Johnson. Did you hear anything about that? Now, when you go back in the jury room, you're going to be reviewing, obviously, these videos. And one of the things that you have to kind of ask yourself is timing. When you see Mr. Johnson in the elevator with his little girl leaving Crosstown that morning. And of course, you know there's going to be one exhibit that's the reel where the state had on it 11:51 in the morning. And then of course Mr. Hagerman came in, acknowledged the mistake to say that wasn't the right time. And put an officer on the stand, the lieutenant, to talk about getting access to the time, how he got the timestamp. But what that shows you is this. They don't know what time it was that day on that video. They don't know. I mean, mistakes get made. I'm not here to suggest that they don't. But you have to ask yourself, okay, the mistake got made, and then there's a timestamp. Okay, we want to put the timestamp one in. That seems like the logical choice. But then you have to listen to the lieutenant, right? And go, Lieutenant, what did you do to check and confirm that these were accurate times? Well, I looked at the live feed when I was in there. Had to have a technician. It's a computer. I don't understand it. But when I was there, I looked up at the screen and it appeared to be the right date and time. But not one person, you didn't hear from anybody that could say, that was confirmed, that's accurate, nothing happened with the system beforehand. And you even heard him say, it is not uncommon at all to pull surveillance cameras that have inaccurate date and times. Because you have to ask yourself about timing. You have to ask yourself about timing of leaving Crosstown, Mr. Johnson presumably going all the way to Whitehaven, if he's in that Mercedes and dropping his daughter off, right? And he said 20 minutes, something like that. Then he's supposedly driving all the way back to Wild Rose, 20 minutes, thereabouts, to pick up Cornelia Smith. They got to leave, then turn around and go to Bradley and go back to the white truck, right? And then get out and be in front of the Makita Cookie at 12:21. Now, that part of common sense and your everyday experiences, what does that tell you about going one place to the other? Right? Takes longer, right? If you're stopping places, if you got to park. If you're presumably dropping a child off, there's going to be some kind of a exchange of a child, maybe a discussion with a person, and you build all that in. That's a lot of time. And I would submit to you that one of the reasons that became an issue is about correcting that time is when the state realized that I was asking questions of that witness and asking him how long it would take to get from point A to point B to here to here to here. Because when you do the math and it's 11:51, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. And all this about Bradley, even the exchange of the Mercedes for the Infiniti, the dropping of the Mercedes at Bradley and picking up the SUV, whether somebody cleaned the Mercedes or didn't, who moved the Mercedes to the backyard, all of that, according to Cornelia Smith, should have been captured on Hernandez Govan's home security system. Right? He said Govan had a security system directly facing Bradley because that's why when he decided that he was going to go wipe the car down, either the day it happened or the day after, he couldn't quite remember, he texted Govan and said he was coming through there because he didn't want Govan to mistake him for somebody trying to come up on him. I asked Detective or Sergeant Dabney, did y'all canvass? Yes, we canvassed the neighborhood. He didn't do it personally, but he would have presumed they would have talked to everybody, including Hernandez Govan. Right? We don't necessarily know if they did or didn't, because we didn't get to hear from Mr. Govan. I asked Detective Browning if he was aware of any video from there. No. But if Cornelia Smith, right, is this person that's telling you the truth, because the truth doesn't change, then the fact that there were videos would have been known as early as March of 22, when he was meeting with law enforcement. And I'm not saying law enforcement doesn't want to find out who did this. They would have absolutely went and looked. But we don't know. We don't know. And there's a lot that you should know that you don't. Because there's a material witness that should have been called by the state that wasn't called. Hernandez Gomez. And maybe some of you sat through this and thought, I want to hear what he has to say. And when I told you in the opening statement, I said, it's important, right? For you to weigh out and be able, as part of your duty as jurors, to be able to compare those two testimonies together. I'm sure some of you were thinking, yeah, that would make sense. I know we talked about that in voir dire, about getting two people to talk to kind of differentiate. Some of you that may have been a teacher, talking about that is one of the ways that you try to figure out who's telling the truth, who isn't. But you weren't able to do that. You weren't able to do that. You were deprived of that. And to be clear, as you heard about Hernandez Govan, he was cooperating in this investigation. He met with law enforcement on at least 2 occasions pursuant to a proffer agreement, which meant he was allowed to go in and give information and not have his words used against him later. I don't have the ability to make good on a proffer letter. Only the state does. I don't have the ability to wave a magic wand and give him a reduced sentence if he comes in and testifies for me. So he's to my exclusion. He's to Mr. Johnson's exclusion, and ultimately to your exclusion. And if this is a truth-seeking function, why didn't the state call him? And it is. Your job's to find the truth of the matter. And ultimately to go, did they prove their case or not? But you were deprived of that. And the judge instructed you about a jury instruction. And that's the law. That's part of all the different things she told you. This is as important as any of them. And the law states that it creates an inference that the testimony of that witness, Govan, would have been unfavorable to the state. Now, it's up to you to decide whether or not he was unavailable, a material witness, and whether or not there should be the inference. But you're allowed to make that inference in here. And unfavorable, I would tell you, unfavorable to the state means favorable to Mr. Johnson. And knowing that, can you really render a verdict of guilty and have your mind rest easy? And not walk away and go, I just don't know if I did the right thing. Knowing that there was information out there that could have been presented to you and wasn't, that would have been favorable to Mr. Johnson, that I couldn't give you. Can you be morally certain in that instance. In order to be convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that Mr. Johnson is the one in that Nikita video, you have to consider everything. You have to consider what you heard. And you have to go, what I heard from Kristen Garner and Cornelius Smith, was that so convincing that I wouldn't hesitate to rely upon it in making those most important decisions in your own life? Will my mind rest easy if I convict this young man based on their word in conjunction with that video and the other videos and what you didn't hear? The answer is no. When you examine your conscience back there, after you've taken the time to deliberate, I think you'll find the answer is no. Two things I want you to remember, and I'm wrapping up. The way the burden of proof works. And you've heard this statement, right? They ain't got nothing to prove. You may say that to somebody, like, I ain't got nothing to prove here. Justin Johnson, he doesn't have anything to prove here. They do. And we've all heard the term benefit of the doubt, right? Everybody likes to give somebody the benefit of the doubt. You are legally prohibited from giving the state the benefit of the doubt. You can't carry their water for them. Again, I appreciate it. This is, as I said, the last time I get to speak to you. The state's going to get one more opportunity to talk to you this morning. They get the last word. That's how the system's set up. But it has been my honor to represent Mr. Johnson in this case, and it's been my honor to present this case before you all. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Bill.